Ladies and gentlemen, we are back for another non-spoiler discussion about The Last of Us. This is episode 4. We're gonna go in, but remember, we're gonna keep the spoilers to a complete silence and a complete halt because bottles and bricks is where that is all going down at. Full discussion, unfiltered, uncut on Ronin Unchanged channel. If you do not know that, go down to the description bar below, subscribe, hit the post notification button because you don't want to miss any of those as they're coming out. I'm going to bring my two hosts on, and somebody else is here, filtered, but he's not actually here. What's going on, Ronan? What's going on, LT?
One star Wapton. Shout out to all the Last of Us and Caribbean people.
Again, sorry for sweating, but holy shit, this episode.
So this is the thing. I'm gonna be honest with y'all, everybody out there. I watched this. And I really didn't watch it the first time. The first time I watched
I think
it,
we're all guilty of that, bro.
I was so exhausted that I looked at it, and the moment I looked up, the episode was ending, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" But having gone back and checked it out again, this was emotional. This is really, I knew about the two characters that play a role in this because I played the game, but it was through letters. Like you don't really get the substance behind what it meant, you know. And they went through it in such a way that I was like, every single time that they handle flashbacks, it expands the lore, it expands the character development and the raw emotion of every single person that's connected to it. Like I am so surprised how good this episode is. When the fact of the matter is, at least 70% to 65% of the movie, this episode didn't have Joel or Ellie in it. That's crazy.
Right. You're right.
That's great storytelling. And so for me, I'm so happy that they have some very good writers and very good actors too, but very good written dialogue and performances throughout most of this show that we've seen thus far. Ronan and LT, what were your thoughts, non-spoiler, unfiltered on this one?
Ty, you want to go first?
Nah, you got it. You got it, Ronan. I'm gonna let you roll because I know you're ready to jump in.
So, non-spoilers, this is my second time watching it. So I got a reaction saved somewhere with footage that I gotta just work Mendel. But the second time, it hit me harder at a certain point, and yet I appreciate the value of this stuff that wasn't in the game. Like you said, most of it's hinted at, and most of it's left up to you to put the pieces together and see how the characters of Bill and Frank went about their lives. And what I liked about it to me, The Last of Us, what it means to me, it's Joe and Ellie, but they are in a world, an outbreak world, and they're not the only survivors. If they were, it'd be a very boring story. So the fact that you have basically more lore now with some characters that one of them might be familiar with, and we're just plugged into their lives, and I appreciate it. And it's one of these moments where like I still have the game and I still like that version, but I appreciate and thankful that I got this version as well, and I can go back and forth on which vibe I want to be. Do I want to spend time with him, or do I want to leave it up into interpretation, leave my mind going and whatnot? So shout out to Nick Offerman and the gentleman who played Frank. They kicked ass. And if you end up seeing some of the footage of our reaction, or my second reaction and Sam's officially first, you're gonna see that they pull some soundtracks, and we were like get the F out of here, HBO, Craig Mazin, Neil Druckmann, how dare you do this to us? So it was a great third episode.
Yeah, so I find it so interesting that Ronan is like, yeah. Well, Ronan was like, yeah, because they're in this world, and I'm sitting here like, in a world where a grown man and a sarcastic teenager are braving an outbreak that wasn't ground zero of a cursed monkey. Like that's what went through my head. You're like, they're in this world, but not non-spoiler, of course. I mean, the episode, I mean, it just hit so hard. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, just when you thought the show couldn't hit you any deeper, it does. It
Right.
just does. And like Ronan said, you don't see our two main characters for the majority of this movie. Excuse me. See, it's almost movie like.
Hey, it really
My
is.
my verbal mistake, but it
It's
really
cinema.
feels that way. You don't see them for the majority of this episode, but it's the things that they're doing in this show, and I don't want to go deep into it because it's going to be in our spoiler review. But it's the things that they're doing in this show. It feels like they're giving us all the bits and pieces that they couldn't do in the game.
Yep, I agree.
And they're fleshing out things that they really truly wanted to focus on in the game but couldn't. And now they have that opportunity and they're using it here. Also, shout out to the actors playing Bill and Frank. They did an amazing job. And clearly no spoiler, but shout out to Neil Druckmann and HBO and the rest of the team for putting particular things in this episode, which they're actually mastering. They're mastering subtle things that they put in an episode that have such an impact later. It's the little things that have the biggest effect. And we'll talk more about it in the spoiler, but there's one particular scene that actually has one of our main characters and another character as part of the storyline for this episode, and it makes a big impact at the end of this episode because it ties back to a previous episode. So shout out to them for putting in these little subtle pieces, and we'll talk about it more in the spoiler in our spoiler review. But shout out to them for putting in those little subtle things that by the time you finish this episode, it hits so hard and really touches your heart, your spirit, your soul, because you can tell they put the work to really give you this quality entertainment. Honestly, I kind of feel like I'm using entertainment wrong because it's entertaining, but it's more so captivating. It's not really meant to entertain you. It's really meant to really draw you into a immersive storyline, and make
Experience.
an experience. Basically, it's an experience. Great choice word there, Ronan. Appreciate you.
Yeah, I feel like the episode it made me feel emotional connection that I didn't think I could. And also found ways of making it very vital to how the other characters are going to kind of explore and navigate this world, because the way that Bill and Frank are utilizing this is a very distinct way. Now, we'll go to more of it in the spoiler discussion, but there was a conversation me and Rona had a while back of what if they start to change how the game's storyline goes. And this is one of those examples. And it's going to be very fascinating to see y'all's perspective on how you look at this, how you value this, and the changes that they made, because it's a very intentional one. We'll go into why and all that. You got to go and tune into Bottles and Bricks on Ronan Change at the bottom of the screen. But yeah, I think that is a point that I'm curious of talking about, because that, from a game perspective, is one of the most intense things. But we'll get into that a little bit later on. This is still a great episode. I can't not give it a 10 because I don't have any negatives to give. Even with the change, like, I don't knock it for points. That's the crazy thing. Like, everything else is like, there's a storyline in this, and I was kind of like, am I gonna care about this? And then all of a sudden it just starts to go, and I'm like, emotional damage again.
They took away something. They took away something from this storyline in the game that I was like, this would have made it great, and I'll say in the spoilers, But I don't know how it would fit in with what they did with this episode. So that's why I'm like, I like it how it is, but I also miss this other scenario that was part of this storyline in this area. So we'll get into it in the spoilers.
Yeah. Well, what do you rate the episode, gentlemen?
I really these it's 10 out of 10 again. There hasn't been anything. I mean, the only thing I mean, if I was to be very like precise about my nitpicks and whatnot, and just because I'm still transitioning from what I know of the game and to be like, this is a show. It's not a carbon copy. It's a show. I would mark it down to 9.5, 9 out of 10. But at the same time, I say this, I could still pause what I'm watching, tell you guys just give me a while, and I can go back and play the game. I can still do and experience that story and those characters that same way. So, to me, there hasn't been any dip in potential, in value, and just you know uh, consistent character and storytelling. Like I said, people who never play the game, I'm very,
Right.
very intrigued to hear what they think of it. Just because I haven't played the game in a while, but because even though I haven't played it, lines, sequences, moments are like flashing back in my brain, and it's making me giddy up like a kid. But I'm also being like, but this is different. This is a different interpretation. So I still give it a 9.59, 10 out of 10. It's still no dip has occurred yet in this series.
Yeah. What about you, Ty?
So I think Ronan kind of nailed it for me. Like, it's a 10 out of 10. And honestly, like he said, if I was to really be nitpicky about it, the only way I could be nitpicky about it is basically, oh, well, this wasn't how it was in the game. But understanding that it is a show interpretation of the game, which automatically makes it different, I can't do the game comparison. I can just appreciate, in the words of Ronan, I can just appreciate when they drop the game references, the game dialogue in it. And if I can't nitpick about it because the show, and that's really a testament to how good it is when you don't want to fall back on that nitpick where you're looking at it as its own intellectual property, you know, the show version of it. It's almost like saying, you know, do I nitpick on Batman in the movie versus Batman in the comic? No, because it's its own intellectual property, it's its own version. So I have to appreciate it. And if I'm not going to nitpick about it and actually appreciate when they give us the game references, at this point, it's still 10 out of 10. Like the show really has no place to go but down for me. And honestly, I don't see, it's one of those things where you give people enough rope, they'll either climb to the top or they'll hang themselves. And right now, this show is skyrocketing its way to the top of my list of probably one of the greatest streaming shows, ever produced and brought to the public. So 10 out of 10 for me. And it's right now it's batting 1,000 because the first and second and now third episode, all tens. All tens.
And this the crazier thing, you guys, and we'll go into it in our spoiler discussion. This is a 70, close to 72-minute episode.
And it didn't feel that way.
Right.
Barring the fact that when we first looked at it, we were super tired, but going back through it, it's like it just didn't feel that way. And honestly, that's the way I felt about the first episode, that the time that was. The second episode actually felt more like a regularly timed episode, but this one, the fact that it was longer than usual, but it didn't feel that way. I don't think I've actually felt that way since watching another, actually a movie, which we'll bring up in the spoiler review. But yeah,
we're gonna get into it deep. Thank you guys. Go and check out Bottles and Bricks for our spoiler discussion. We're about to jump in. It's uncut, unfiltered, Running Unchained. Let them know. We'll be back. Until next time. Yeah.